I recently gave a talk at the AAMC in Phoenix, Arizona, and it was on connection and disconnection in medical education. And part of my research interest that I do outside of the podcast, outside of being a psychiatrist, is looking at the big issues that we face in medicine, including, physician suicides, bullying, bias, harassment, burnout, engagement. How do we get people to engage more? And looking at medical education as a whole, and the area that I focused on was connection. How does one connect with their supervisor? How does one improve their connection? And how do I supervise better? How do I coach people to supervise better? So I created something called the Connection Index. It's 12 questions, a 7-point Likert scale. And I'm going to be going through both the qualitative and the quantitative data on this, looking at what the construct of connection is and why that's really important to understand, even if you're not in medical education. Okay. So we looked at supervision dyads. So we looked at one person connecting with another person. Now that's important because there's other people who have done, studies on things like psychological safety, but it's more of a group. But I really wanted to put it down to 2 people. And this will allow us to measure it accurately and be able to make changes and improvements. So in the initial study, we looked at the different areas of in the interpersonal and all of those sort of questions and domains that might go into the interpersonal. And so how do we define the interpersonal? Well, there's empathy, there's education alliance, the therapeutic alliance, the connection between you and the other person, the goals, the common bond. There's the psychological safety. Another thing that I talk about in my podcast is psychological safety. It's the ability to feel safe giving interpersonal feedback or saying that you disagree with something. There's also feedback. So if you are working with someone, you may have heard the sandwich method of, say something nice and then say something not so nice and then say something nice. But what's more important actually is all of the interpersonal that goes into it. And I'll talk about that more. So we've created a bunch of questions, and then we found that 4 domains kind of came together. Okay. So what I mean by that is in factor analysis, you see how the fish are swimming, are some going this way and some going the other way and some going the other way. And we look for things where all the fish are going in the same direction. And then we know we're looking at the same thing, right? And so what we found was that empathy, psychological safety, education alliance, and feedback actually all swam together. What that means is that they're all the same construct. Okay, they're all highly related. And we came down to 12 questions. And we looked at this 9 criteria framework, which my mentor, Dr. Kashner, came up with actually on how to evaluate a survey tool. And so we did construct validation. We looked at the consistency. And one of the things that I'll mention is that we had a really high scalability coefficient of 0.78 and a second highest eigenvalue of 0.68. And what those together really show is that this is a singular construct. If you score high in one, you're going to score high in all the others. And if you score low in one, you're going to score low in all of the others. And that's what we found in the research. And so I'm going to read through the questions, and then you're going to see how actually you might score someone that you work with, right? Do they have high connection? Do they have low connection? And I'll put this in my resource library, and we'll put a link through the website. You can go to my resource library. It's free. So question number 1, I would voice my concerns or questions with this person. Would you strongly agree, moderately agree, slightly agree? Would you be neutral to that? Slightly disagree, moderately disagree, or strongly disagree, So I would voice my questions and concerns with this person. That's a psychological safety question, as well as I felt free to express things that worry me, and I felt free to ask for more information about his or her decisions or actions. Okay? So those are psychological safety. Do you feel like you can overcome the fear of giving someone feedback? The next 3 are therapeutic alliance or educational alliance questions. The way we communicated was clear and helpful to our goals. This person seemed to respect me regardless of my mistakes. I felt grateful to have worked with this person. So slightly agree, moderately agree, strongly agree. Okay, those are all the positive ones for that. And then the next 3 questions are empathy. So I felt understood and heard based on this person's body language, nonverbal cues, and facial expressions. This person was in touch with my perceptions and concerns. And I felt heard and understood. Okay, so those are empathy questions. And once again, people were scoring high in psychological safety, education alliance, also scored high in empathy. And the last group is the feedback, okay? So things like when this person made decisions, they explained their thought process to me. This person gave me feedback with specifics, not with generalizations, based on observations, not hearsay. And this person gave me a chance to work out answers for myself. So those ones, surprisingly, were highly correlated with empathy, with psychological safety, and with education alliance, okay? So here's the conceptual framework. We have 2 people. We're looking at them. We're asking ourselves, are they connecting well in supervision? This is like as they meet throughout their rotations or as they meet and try to connect and discuss patient care. Are they connecting? That interpersonal piece. And then we're looking at outcomes. We're looking at, is this resident or person showing up? Are they seeking out supervision? And not surprisingly, if you feel really disconnected, you're not going to show up as much. Is there bullying and harassment, prejudice and bias going on? And does this person who's receiving the supervision feel burned out? Okay, so those are the outcomes that we're looking at. And what we found is that the outcomes didn't always map in a linear fashion. So normally when we speak about correlation, like 0.2 to 0.8, 0.8 being a strong correlation, 0.9 being even stronger, 1 being a perfect correlation, we're talking about a linear line. Okay, does this information all group together in a linear line? And some of our data showed that. For example, subjective emotional experience. As you met with a person and you felt more stressed out, you were more likely to also feel disconnected. So lower in things like if you felt more stressed out, you would also rate the person as lower empathy, lower psychological safety, lower feedback, lower education alliance. Okay, so that was a linear line. Now, some of the information as it modeled, it didn't model in a linear line. And this is really important to think about when you're reading research. For example, is the risk of something non-existent until you get to a certain degree or amount of something, and then all of a sudden it shoots up, okay? That would be more like a stepwise approach. And what we found with prejudice and bias, bullying and harassment, was it was a stepwise approach that once you hit 4, which is, if you go back, this is the neutral, okay? Once you go neutral or below, so into slightly disagree, moderately disagree, or strongly disagree for any of these questions, then it's possible that there was some prejudice and bias, bullying and harassment that was experienced, okay? Whereas when we looked at the Maslow burnout inventory, and specifically the emotional exhaustion, okay, which is the closest correlated to depression, it showed that there was a pretty flat line until you got to someone you were really, really connected with. And then there was a decrease in your burnout. That was really interesting because we were surprised to find that it was only the super, super connected supervisors who actually were making an impact in the emotional exhaustion, which it shouldn't be too much of a surprise actually, but now it makes more sense to me. If you're super connected to someone, you actually feel better about yourself, better about what you're doing. You might, hate work less. Okay, so this is an example of the burnout questions. Burnout questions like, I feel emotionally drained at work. Never, a few times a week or less, once a month or less, a few times a month or less, once a week or less, once a week, a few times a week, or every day. So you can see how it's also a 7-point Likert scale. And there was a decrease in 0.647 when you went from a near perfect connection to a perfect connection. So it really was that perfect connection that dropped the emotional exhaustion all of a sudden. Okay, so in summary, there is a single construct of connection, and there's different ways of modeling the outcomes. Now I'm going to go into the second study that is on, it's a qualitative study that we did. We videotaped 16 medical students. We had them take the survey for the most connected attending and the least connected attending. Okay, so we had them take the same survey, and then we asked them, why did you say this, or why did you say that? Why did you say, they're the most connected? And we were trying to pull out stories as well. So when we asked the medical students about the most connected supervisor, the resident or the attending that they worked with, and they felt most connected with, and we looked at the empathy domain, and the things about the most connected supervisor, specifically that came out of the empathy domain, was that they were mentally present, that they paid attention, that they were engaged, that they understood the concerns or made an effort to do so. They got to know the student on a personal level, and they greeted the student and acknowledged their presence and their work. The least connected supervisor in the empathy domain was not mentally present, only concerned about their own matters, didn't know the student's name, no questions about how they were doing, made the students feel non-existent, no respect to their time, and the students feared making mistakes. Okay, in the psychological safety domain, the most connected supervisor was safe to ask questions, even if busy or the student thought they were stupid. The senior encouraged the student to learn from and even question their decision-making. And the senior cared about the student as an individual and allowed them to express their worries and their thoughts. In the psychological safety domain with the least connected supervisor, these students feared voicing concerns or questions and they feared that they would be seen as useless or stupid. When expressing questions, the senior was condescending or hostile and saw them as an attack on their judgment, the supervisor's judgment. The student was referred to as a medical student rather than by their name. The senior would talk without breaks, not give them any time to ask questions or talk themselves. There was no expectation of the student, and the senior was disengaged. In the feedback domain, the most connected supervisor taught at the level of the student, invested in teaching and making sure the student learned, voiced their thought process out loud, gave the student assignments, encouraged the student to reteach other students, encouraged the student to take ownership of their patients, gave them autonomy and responsibility, and gave specific feedback, not just like you need to read more. In the feedback domain, the least connected supervisor was concerned with showing how smart they were, exposed the student's lack of knowledge, only gave criticism, couldn't give feedback because they weren't paying attention, mistakes weren't used as a learning opportunity, and they gave generic feedback and gave feedback based off others' observations and opinions. In the Education Alliance domain, the most connected supervisor was said to have a goal to teach and took the time to do so, taught and gave tasks at the student's level, didn't make the student feel stupid or small, made mistakes learning opportunities, did not lose respect for the student after mistakes, gave specific goals, tasks, and responsibilities to the student, discussed their learning goals and objectives, made the student feel a valued part of the team, and was looked up to as a role model. I've taken this information to start to do coaching for attendings on good and bad outcomes, teaching them how to improve their ability to connect with those that they train. So whether you're in training or if you're an attending or someone who's going to be training others, I think that this is very important information, or just how to be a good human being, learning the basics of empathy, psychological safety, feedback, therapeutic alliance, education alliance. These are the things that I'm passionate about, that I get excited about, and that I think people can improve. And I've seen it. So I'd love to hear your thoughts. Throw it in the comment section. If you would like to know more information on this, I will be emailing it out as the publications are published. And I look forward to discussing this stuff further in future podcasts. So if you haven't checked out the podcast, check that out.